Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm a reasonably happy alcoholic. My home group is the Seekers Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. We meet in Jonesboro, the oldest town in Tennessee. When we meet on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. And if you'd like to join me, then I'll be happy to buy you a cup of coffee if you're in the neighborhood. I was looking at the faces in this meeting, and there's a couple of screens, and I was wondering if this was the geriatric community of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a lot of old timers, looks like, in here. At least there's old people anyway. And it reminded me of a story about old Bill. Old Bill had a lot of years of sobriety, and he grabbed his sponsee, Bob, who was just, new into the program. He said, "Bob, we got to go get old Joe. Old Joe wants to go to a meeting, and we're going to pick him up at his house, and we're going to take him to a meeting." And Bill says, I wasn't going to, I was going to go eat. I was really hungry. He said, "No, you're coming with me, Bob." And so they got in the car, and they went over to see old Joe. And they get to his place, and they go inside, and old Joe is in the bedroom, and Bill says, "I'm going to go in there and I'm going to help him get dressed. Wait out here for me in the living room." So Bob is sitting there, and he's hungry, and he looks on the coffee table, and there's a bowl of peanuts. And he thinks, maybe I'll just eat a peanut, and that'll work. So he eats one. And you know what happens when you eat a peanut? It leads to two. It's just like drinking. Peanuts are just as bad. And so by the time old Joe and Bill come out of the room, that young newcomer had eaten all of the peanuts in the bowl. But he knew that he had to be honest, because that's what he's been learning in AA, the honesty part of the program. So he confessed. He said, "Joe, I got to tell you, I really apologize, but I ate all the peanuts in that bowl." And Joe looked at him and said, "That's okay. I've already sucked the chocolate off of all of them." So that's what AA is for me. It's a lot of fun. I listen to a bunch of stories. I listen to people share. I identify with people. And I fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. If it doesn't become clear to anybody during my talk, I want to make sure that it's clear now. It was always about God. It is always about God. It always will be about God, as far as I'm concerned. And this was before I believed in God, or that God believed in me, or any which way, shape, or form. It's all about God in my life, and that's the way that I go. I was born on Miami Beach. I was born in Miami. I was raised on a private island. My father was a successful athlete, so there was a lot of drinking and things going on, and I was an entitlement child. I had my own governess. I thought everybody did, and she used to dress me, and if I went out and got dirty, she would bring me inside and change me, and I'd go out and get dirty again, and everything was fine. Everything was everything was fine, and then I had to go to school. I had to go to preschool, and it was hard, because I didn't want to go shopping, because I had to go shopping to get all these new clothes, and I didn't want to have to try this on and blah, blah, blah with my mother and everything. And I had to be rewarded for my efforts. And yet, the morning of the day I started preschool, I was going to dress myself. My governess, Clara, I said, "No, I'll do this by myself. I'm a big man now. I'm off to change the world in preschool." And so I got dressed and I went to school, and I walked in, and my teacher said, "Good morning, Royce. Can I help you?" And I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you have your shoes on the wrong feet." I didn't even know how to dress myself. But boy, I can tell you this, That was my first resentment on my fourth step, that I did not like the institution of school. I did not like the principle of authority, and I did not like her for telling me the truth. So I had those three things: those people, places, and principles that drove me all the way through my elementary school year and years. And I spent a bit of time in the principal's office in elementary school, but by the time I got to sixth grade, I found my sixth grade report card. So from my preschool days to sixth grade at the end of the year, this is what my teacher, they used to write things in cursive, so that the children couldn't read it. It said that Royce is a very capable boy. He could do much, much better if he learned to control his emotions. I'm sure he will want to improve his attitude. Next grading period, Royce certainly has let himself go downhill. He has simply wasted his time. He must do better in the near future. Next grading period, Royce has improved, yet he must improve much, much more if he is to do satisfactory seventh grade work next year. And then he says, and then my last grading period, he says, through careful consideration, it is my opinion that Royce will have to improve in his self-control and subject matter. He is planning to do seventh grade work. I hope that Royce will take this work more seriously next year. Have a nice vacation. And you can't read it because you didn't write it, but he would have said, because I'm going to, because that little bastard isn't in my life anymore. And that's, and then, I liked seventh grade so much, I did it twice, and by the time I got to 10th grade, I was out. It was over. I couldn't, I got expelled. I went back. I quit. I went back. I got expelled. I didn't go back. And I ended up with a choice of, by the time I'm mid 17 years old, I got a choice of either Rayford Prison, which is the state prison in Florida, or the military. And so, I chose the military, which only exacerbated my poor decision-making process that much more. And, but I did. I went there, and then I got out of the military. Unfortunately, I was able to go to school on the GI Bill, and I went to Miami-Dade, and then I went to University of Miami, and then I went to after I got out, after I got out of the military, I went to New York. I forgot about this. This is an interesting one. Because I met a woman and I married her. I guess we can't forget everything, but I do my best sometimes. I married her, and we had 3 wonderful daughters from that marriage. And I ended up then starting college in Miami, and then we ended up in Boulder, Colorado, where I got my degree. And then we moved back to New York, and I got a job in a adolescent treatment program in Brighton Beach. So anybody that's been to New York or Brooklyn, you know where Brighton Beach is. They serve knishes and turkey tushes on the counter. And I did okay there for a while, and yet I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't going anywhere with this particular job. I was the paraprofessional. So we moved back down to Miami, and I got a job. I started teaching school, and I taught in what's called the hospital homebound program. I taught children one-on-one who had catastrophic illnesses or injuries, and I provided them with an educational prescription while they were under medical supervision. And I did that for 28 and a half years, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But what happened to me is that Did I mention I was drinking all this time? I hope I did, because if I didn't mention it, because it just goes with the territory. I drank. I loved to drink. I loved everything about drinking. I just, I mean, people would say, uh, you you drink a lot. And I know you don't drink enough. I always had an answer for everybody. So I remember I was at my house one night, and I was I drank a few beers right down. Somebody said, "Boy, you really drink those fast." And I said, I don't like to drink it when it gets hot and flat. And then about 4 or 5 in the morning, I'm walking around the house and I'm drinking the half bottles of beer or the half cans of beer. And somebody said, "I thought you didn't like the hot, flat beer." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to let it go to waste." I had an answer. I always had an answer, whether it was real or fiction. It was still an answer, and I was happy with it. I ended up becoming emotionally involved with another woman, and I divorced my first wife, and I married my second wife, and I have a daughter and a son from that marriage. So I have 5 children overall. And I guess I got divorced and married in February. I was getting a GI Bill. I was on a GI Bill. And if you missed a month, they would cut your money. So, I had to plan things out so that I didn't miss a government payment, didn't want to spoil that. And so I was married to my first wife for 12 years and married to my second wife for 8 years. And then she didn't want to be married anymore. She wasn't happy. And in Florida, it's no fault. So, the divorce went through. And I can tell you at that point, my drinking did take off to a truly unrealistic point. It got to the point to where I had moved in to a house with another friend. He was an emergency room nurse, and we ran a crack house, and it was we thought we were just playing darts, but most of I don't know, my story's coming to a close end when you mentioned that, you mentioned crack or some other drug or something, but that's what happened. I was doing what I needed to do and had to get what I had to get. And I ended up not being able to work. I was what the psychiatrist called aggravated stress. And that's a code for alcoholism and drug addiction. And I remember going to his office one evening for, trying to get my prescriptions. And he said, "You're crazy. I can't help you." And that's a pretty bad sign when the psychiatrist tells you you're crazy. And so I left there disappointed because I wasn't able to get my prescription. And I stayed out of work for almost 2 years on a medical leave. And I hadn't, and when I did go back, the day I went back, I got a phone call, and it was a person that I did things with, and it was, the phone calls, he said that the marshals were at my house. They were throwing all my stuff out onto the street. And it was, I was so offended because I had told my landlady that I was going to pay the rent, and I had told her that for a year. But, after a year, she finally had enough, and she just got the marshals, and they came over. And the marshals, in case anybody doesn't know this, they're not a moving company. When they move you out of your house, they move it by throwing things as far as they can. And I on my way back to the house, I stopped and I got a couple of tall boys and I pull up to the front of the house and there they are. They're just throwing everything out onto the street. And I saw what I wanted. And I walked through this pile of rubble. It was my lazy boy chair. And I sat down in my lazy boy chair and I popped the top to that beer and I grabbed that crank handle and I backed it up and I took a big long swig and I thought to myself, this isn't so bad. I'll figure this out. I'm going to be back on top pretty soon. I'm sure of that. And there began my homeless stretch for about 6 months. I ended up in jail a couple of times. A total misunderstanding on the part of the officers in charge. I had actually failed the sobriety test, and I was not under the influence of alcohol when I did it. But I was shaking so bad I couldn't stand up straight, and I almost put my eye out when they told me to touch my nose. I was that bad, and it was serious, but I wasn't going to quit. I'm not a quitter. So I continued. I got out. My oldest sister, bailed me out of jail twice over a 3-month period. I ended up on South Beach. I ended up living in a box between Ocean 1 and Ocean 2 and Ocean 3. And it was January, and it gets cold in January in Florida when the winds blow off of the ocean. But it was a good box. Don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining about the box. It was a refrigerator box, sturdy construction. And I realized I used to be a Dade County school teacher. I have insurance. I could probably go and get help. And I called my daughter, my number 2 daughter, the one I call my nature child. And I asked her if she would give me some money so that I could go to the hospital and be fixed. And she said she would. I have a letter from her that she wrote me. It was my birthday's in November, and this is in January when I finally got this. And she says, "Hi, Pop, I hope your luck turns around soon because I miss the father I had, the father who taught his girls to fish and ski. I hope in this year to come you'll do a 180. Well, I'll talk to you later. I love you, Pop." And I have another letter from my other daughter. I have, and these are children that I had chased out of my life who were afraid of me because they didn't know who was going to show up. They didn't know if it was going to be Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, that person. And so I had chased them all out. But, she lent me the money to get to us. It was the South Miami Hospital. They have an addiction treatment facility there. And I went into the hospital and they gave me a big book. They gave me a 12 and 12. They gave me an NA book. They gave me a 24 hours a day book, and all wrapped up in cellophane. And I couldn't figure out how to open the dang thing, so I didn't read them, but I had them. And I was about 2 or 3 days later, they're wheeling me around in one of those big fancy wheelchairs because they were feeding me phenobarbital so I wouldn't go into DTs. And they were doing what they could do for me until a friend also came into the hospital. And he said, he came into detox also. And after he was there for 24 hours, he said to me, maybe we should order up a little more despair. I have a friend that can put some some loneliness in a tennis ball and throw it up and we'll catch it and we'll consume some just downright loneliness. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. So we're now in the hospital smoking crack and snorting heroin because you can't throw a bottle up. You just wouldn't and you couldn't put enough in a tennis ball anyway to get anybody anywhere anyway. And so I'm now bragging to the other inmates in the hospital. And one of them says, you have to tell your counselor. You can't do that. You're supposed to, you can't do that. So the next day, I'm in my counselor's office and I told him, I said, yeah, what we did last night was, blah, blah, blah. And he looked at me and he said, what did you say? And, he was kind of an elderly guy and I figured he was just hard of hearing. So I raised my voice and I talked louder and I told him again. And he said, whoa, wait a minute. And he got up and he went and he got the director of the program and brought him into the room. And he says, tell him what you just told me. And I thought I had arrived, I've got the director's attention now. And so I told him. And he said, I don't think we can help you here. You need to get up right this minute and leave. That didn't put fear into me. It was cold, abject terror. I didn't have a home. I didn't have a car. I had the clothes that I wore to the hospital. I didn't have a friend. My family didn't want me around. I had absolutely nothing but that defiance from the night before. That was what I was operating on. Tough guy. I can tell you that from that moment on, I said to him, please don't send me out there. I'll do anything you ask me to do. And that's what I've done since I've come into Alcoholics Anonymous. I got into a residential treatment facility and we were driven around, they drive you around in the humility van, the white van with all big windows on the side. So everybody gets to look in at you, go, oh, like you're a goldfish in a bowl or something. And they would, I'm going to a meeting and the guy, and I'm cracking jokes because there's 8 or 9 other people and I'm pretty funny, And so they're going to a meeting and this counselor who's driving the van, he says, Royce, you ought to just shut up. You're cracking jokes and you're not even funny. And my lower lip pouted out, me not funny. And I said, oh yeah, what do you want me to do? And he said, you need to get a sponsor. Oh yeah, how do you do that? I said. He said, we're going to a meeting. Find somebody who has something you like and ask them to be your sponsor. So okay, fine. I had that little smidgen of willingness. And I walked into the meeting and there was this person sitting in his chair, laughing, looking comfortable in his own skin and looking like he really wanted to be there. And I walked up to him and I said, would you be my sponsor? And he said, it would be an honor. And I thought I asked the craziest son of a gun in Alcoholics Anonymous to sponsor me. He doesn't know anything about who I am, what I've done. He knows nothing about me. Well, years later, maybe not years, I don't know, but a good amount of time, I realized what I had said and what he had said. In reality, I asked him, would you be my friend? I hadn't had a friend. I just never had friends. And he told me it would be an honor, not because of who he was talking to at that moment, but that if I did what he did, I would get what he got, and that would be an honor to know a person like that. And so I began the journey. And I was, you have to go to meetings all for Sunday mornings for a while, for about a month or so. And the first Sunday I had off, the Friday before that at that meeting, he said, you want to go to a meeting with me Sunday morning? I said, sure. So I showed up at the meeting, and he said, I'll pick you up at 8:00. So I got out there at 5 to 8 because I wanted to impress him. And he was sitting there waiting for me. He had driven 15 or 20 miles south to drive 30 miles north to go to a meeting. And the reason that I mention this is because this was the first, I had been to meetings with the inmates at the residential, but it was always us and them. It was us and you all, you laughing, ha, 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 fun, love, joking around and everything. And I'm thinking, this is so serious. I'm going to die and you're laughing. You're making jokes about things. Well, I can tell you this, that meeting that he took me to that Sunday morning, I had a belly laugh. I don't know if you've ever had a belly laugh or not, but it's one of those laughs from your belly. And it's just so free feeling. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful feeling. I left that meeting and I said, that was great. I want to do that again. And he said, okay, we'll do it next week and you can give me your opinion on the third step. You never had, I did get a good sponsor. He never made me do anything about the first step or the second step. I think this is cool. Maybe I can skip through the steps, hit hopscotch through the steps. But he knew that. Nobody wants to go to an AA meeting. Nobody, you don't want to go to an AA meeting because, you like the people there necessarily. I've been to enough AA meetings where I don't like everybody there. Not you people, not you people, but you know who I'm talking about. You know that person. And so he said, so anyway, I went back and I'm just happy as a clam in sand. And this woman offered me a job. And now I can go out and I can go work for a living. On Monday, I can start a new career. My job was a pencil salesman. I was going to sell pencils in Dade County. I was going to corner the market on sales of pencils, number 2s and number 4 pencils. And I went out with a lot of ambition, and I can tell you that pencil sales did not pick up that morning. And I needed a meeting. I needed some spiritual, something for lunch, a noon meeting where I could be refortified with the spirit of the universe. And so I went to this meeting and I sat down, and this guy said, the chairman, he said, my name's Nick and I'm an atheist. And you don't need this freaking God to get sober. What you need to do is you need to grow up and take responsibility for your own actions. And I sat on my hands and I thought, oh, wait for the lightning bolt, Royce. It's coming soon. It's coming. It's coming. And Nick went on for the hour and I stayed for the hour. On these meetings, I stay from prayer to prayer. That was one of the only meetings I did not stay from prayer to prayer because they did not pray. They just started the meeting and they ended the meeting, and that was it. But when I left there, I thought I can claim some spiritual growth because I was willing to sit in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and listen to somebody's opinion who didn't agree with my opinion at all. I did not believe. I believed things that he didn't have any belief in. And yet what he said was, You've got to take responsibility for your own behavior. You need to grow up. And I have heard that for many, many years in my head. Well, I can tell you, though, that pencil sales did not pick up that day. And they didn't pick up for the next couple of days. In fact, I never sold a pencil. I never even sold a pencil. And it was a Friday. And the group is going to have we're going to go to an eating meeting. And so I went to this meeting, and I'm sitting down at these long bench tables, and across from me was another a woman who was in the residential treatment facility, and she was with her friend. And she said, "Oh, I heard that you have to leave this Sunday." I said, "Yeah, they told me that I have to leave." And she said, "Well, you don't have a job." I go, "No, I don't have a job." And she said, "And you don't have any money?" I said, "Nope, I don't have any money." She said, "And you don't have a place to stay?" I said, "Nope, I don't have a place to stay." She said, "What are you going to do?" And I looked at my plate and I said, "I think I'm going to eat my potato salad." And her friend says to me, "You don't have a place to stay?" And I wanted to throttle him. I was about ready to reach over the table, but I thought for a second, and I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, I own an apartment building on Ocean Drive on South Beach. Would you like an apartment to stay in for free as long as you want until you can get yourself on your own 2 feet?" And I said, "Thank you." And I did not wait till Sunday to move out. I moved out the next morning, and I'm on Miami Beach. I'm swimming in the ocean. I'm in God's little pocket there, swimming around. And Sunday morning, I meet up with my friend, and he said, "So what's your opinion of the third step?" And I said, "It works. It really works." As it does. When I stopped, and you know what it was? It wasn't so much what I wasn't trying to formulate this great opinion of the third step, but what I was thinking about, or what I wasn't thinking about, was me. And I spent a week almost not thinking about me. Well, I can tell you that I better get moving along with this sobriety story, because I went through the steps and I got to the 8th step. And my friend helped me with the 8th step. He took off the people who shouldn't be on the list. And I made a list of people, who I'll make amends to. I made, my financial list. And then I made amends to people I'll make right away. And then I'll make, when I run into them. And then I'll make my list of people who I'll make amends to in my next life. And my second wife was on that list, because she dragged me through the divorce courts and beat me up so poorly that when I was working, she was making more money on my salary than I was making. And I just had to work through all of that. And I worked, I did the paperwork, and I did the 5th step about it, and my side and all that good stuff. And, and I did 6 and 7. And so I don't want to be this kind of person anymore. But she still wasn't going to get an amends in this lifetime. So the 9th step promises that if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. Well, I went out to make amends. I went to the phone company and I paid them. And then I went to the electric company and I paid them. And then I went to the water company and I went to pay them. And she said, "Oh, no, you don't owe us any money." I said, "Oh, no, I do. I'm positive I owe you money. I'm here to amend you. Let me amend you." And she said, "Do you live at this address?" And I said, "No, that's where the psycho bitch from hell lives." And she said, well, that's where we shut the water off today. And I thought, suddenly, you know that phrase? Suddenly we'll realize that God was doing for me what I could not do for myself. I could not muster the courage or the fortitude to call her prior to them shutting off her water that day. It was God. And I called her and I apologized for the water being shut off. And I said I was at the water company and I paid it. And can we get together and talk? And we did. We met at a restaurant. I got there early. I was afraid. I called my friend. He said, you want me to go and hold your hand for you? And I said, no, but thank you for the gesture. And so I went there and I went to the restaurant and I removed all the sharp tools. And I ended up sitting down and began to make amends to this woman. And she was, she was bobbleheading me. And then, I would say something and then she would mention something and then she would start to, exaggerate it a little bit. And then, and it got to the point to where she was just telling bull-faced lies about stuff that hadn't happened. And I could feel it churning inside me, I'm thinking, you lying SOB, but I didn't say anything because what happened was I realized she's not really much different than I am. If I told a lie 3 times, it became the truth. And it was the real truth and nothing but the truth because I had said it 3 times. And I listened. And when I knew it was over, I had a present for my son. It was his birthday coming up in a couple of days. I said, can you give this to Andrew? It's his birthday. She said, no, you're court ordered not to see him. I said, well, can I call him? She said, no, you're court ordered not to talk to him. She said, but if you go to the psychiatrist, the psychologist that I tell you to go to, and you go to him enough times to where he thinks it's safe for you to be with your son, I will let you see your son in his office. And I said, thank you. And I did. I went to the psychologist for about a month, 4 or 5 visits. And then he said, it's okay for your son to come to the office. So my son and I went to the office together and we had sessions together for about a month. And then the psychologist told my ex that I am safe to be with. So my son and I, we went to the youth fair. It's a state fair, it's a big, roller coasters and Ferris wheels and all that sort of stuff. And I went there and we had just one heck of a time. He's about 8 years old at this time. A year later, he says to me, Pop, are we going to go back to the youth fair? It's our anniversary. How do these kids do this stuff to you? Kids aren't, I melted. I ended up in a relationship after about 2 years with a wonderful woman who I was with until the day she died. And I had a daughter from that same marriage. And she hated my guts. She used to say vile and contemptible things about me. They were true, but she didn't have to say it. And I ended up with this woman named Ellen, and blessed to be with her. And I'm about 2 years sober now, and it's Christmas morning. And Ellen and I are going over to my first wife's house to have Christmas breakfast with her and my other children. And my second wife is going to be there as well. So now I'm with my girlfriend going over to this house where two of my ex-wives live. And we pulled into the driveway, and Ellen is a blonde, and she was driving a Ford Explorer. And I pulled in, and there's two other Ford Explorers there. And I realized that those two belonged to my first and second wives. And both of them were blonde too. So I'm in a relationship with a third blonde who drives a Ford Explorer, and I'm thinking, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. Maybe I just have a learning disability. Maybe it's not so, maybe I've overreacted. And as we pulled up, I saw who I thought was my second wife, and I called out to her, and she turned around and she said, "Hi, Pop." It was my daughter who hated my guts. She had heard that Pop had changed, and I had changed. I changed a lot. Still not enough, but a lot. I can tell you this, though, that about 5 years later, I'm in Peru with this daughter, and she let me know in no uncertain terms that vicarious amends are not acceptable in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had taken for granted, because she thought I had changed, that I didn't have to address it with her directly. And that was my biggest mistake in Alcoholics Anonymous, that up until that point, was that reality. But we did sit down and we did work it through. I spent the last year and a half with my, I guess, the real love of my life dying from pancreatic cancer, and I got to be with her every day, every doctor's appointment, every treatment that she went through, and she taught me a lot of things about living and how to do things in an honorable and gracious way. I know Jeannie knows Ellen, because we all who went to the Coral Gables group know her. All of the children are back in my life. I got to help my mother die. She died from liver cancer. She took about 2 months to die, and I got to help her die with dignity. And I got to make amends to my oldest sister, who bailed me out of jail. And that was in a strange amends, because you know how to deal with things that used to baffle me, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to say or how I was going to make amends to my sister and my brother-in-law, whose car I used to steal on a regular basis. And we sat down and got quiet for a minute and just paused, and I said, I haven't been the brother I think you always wanted or wished that you had. And I hope that from now on, I can be that brother to you. And we all started crying, and it was just, very touching. So it didn't take a lot. And so after my mom passed, she wrote me a letter, and she said, "I loved the time we spent together. I would never have said that years ago. You are proof positive that people can change their lives. I'm so glad you did." I told you that I was a hospital homebound teacher, and two little ladies come into my mind, Virginia and Kayla. And they were both 13 years old, and they had osteosarcoma, which is a bone cancer, very, very painful. And I got to be with them for almost a year before they both passed. And I lost a lot of my students to diseases. Children who never graduated from elementary school, let alone high school. But I know that if I said to you, hey, Kayla, hey, Virginia, listen, I got a place where you can go and you can hang out with a bunch of people who are just like you. They got the same disease as you. And what you do when you get there is you go around and you shake hands with people and you drink sodas and you eat cookies and you tell funny stories and you tell each other how to stay alive by not dying from your disease. I have a real hard, strong feeling they would say, where is this place? I've got to go there. I got to meet those people. If they can do it, I can do it. And that's what I've done. I could not get sober by myself. I cannot stay sober by myself. And I love you all. And if nobody's told you that today, I have, and you can't do a damn thing about it. Thank you for letting me share.